Woohoo and welcome back. Today we're going to be working in 0.5, Operations with Algebraic Expressions, which is actually a section that's all about word problems. Yay! And in this section, we're going to be setting up two of the most important models that we're going to use in this class. And the first one is all about the production and sale of units. So let's go over some definitions. X will, in this model, always stand for the number of units of production, which means the number of units produced and sold. And in our model, we're going to be very simple about it. Everything you make, you're going to sell. So you don't have to worry about inventory or any of those interesting things. Now, occasionally, X may represent something like a dozen units or 100 units. So pay attention, but X will always represent how many things you're making. C is going to stand for cost. That's the amount of money you spend to run your business. And our big formula is going to be total cost equals variable cost plus fixed cost. Now, when we're talking about variable cost and fixed cost, there's a big dividing line. The variable cost is the cost of producing the items you sell, specifically the per item cost. So the example would be the materials to make the item. So anything that goes into each item, making each item, is going to come into variable cost. Now, as our model expands, we could include costs that would be how much you pay the people who are helping you make your items if you have employees. This may have to do with if you're going to consider how much electricity gets used per item to produce something if you're running large machines. So this can be really an expansive concept. In our class, we're going to keep it pretty straightforward. The fixed cost is going to be the cost of running the business outside of production. So these are the costs that you incur as a business regardless of how many things you make. So for example, rent. You're going to have to pay rent whether you make a bunch of something or you make nothing, right? Once you sign the contract, you have to pay the rent or the lease on the space you're going to use. Another big item is if you buy a machine that makes a certain part of your production or makes the whole thing, you have to buy that machine. Usually you don't pay a per item cost. Now, occasionally, if you rent a machine, that may push the machine into a variable cost situation. But again, those sort of divisions, those sort of complications, we're going to leave for you to learn about in another class. Our system is going to stay pretty simple. Our revenue, sorry, I was thinking of the French. This is the money that you get from selling the units. And the reason I said French is it means to come back. This is the money that literally comes back to you. And the revenue is going to have a really nice, straightforward formula. It's just the price times the number of items produced or sold. And we happen to know, right, if you've got the number of items produced or sold, that's just up here, which is X. So in fact, this got a little bit low, sorry about that. So in fact, as we move this up, revenue is the price times the number of items produced or sold, which means it's the price times X. And notice that this is a lowercase p. There are going to be lots of p's that we come across in economics. It's one of the most common letters. And here's another one. Uppercase P in our system is going to stand for profit. In fact, we will come across other things that can be represented with lowercase or uppercase p. So just keep in mind that you, in whatever system you're looking at, make sure you know what the variables are representing. So revenue is price times the number sold. The profit, which we're going to use capital P for, and then I said notice this is capital P, not lowercase. Profit is revenue minus cost. This is the money you get to keep. And I would just say that hopefully as we're going through this, the money that you get, you subtract the money you have to spend. That's up here, and I'm pointing to the cost because I don't have quite enough space. There we go. The revenue, the money you get to, the money that comes in, minus cost, the money that goes out, is P, the money you get to keep, the profit. This hopefully is feeling very straightforward right now, but during a test, these are the things that you can suddenly forget. And it's easy to reverse these two. So I recommend you come up with a way to remember this. One way is that it is in reverse alphabetical order, right? Revenue comes first and then cost. Another way, I had a student many years ago who said that they had no trouble remembering it because they thought of it as people, race, cars. And I thought that was adorable and wonderful. So if you want to come up with, porcupines are cute, some mnemonic to help you remember it, just remember that it's the revenue minus the cost. Okay, so I've got squirrel and a pumpkin here to help us because we've got an example to run through. Woohoo! Let's hear for examples. Yay, examples. So, dun dun dun. Now, first off, I'm going to say I did no research. I just made this up. So all these numbers are made up to make it easier for us to do a tangible example. So we're going to be running a pumpkin farm. So our friend the squirrel is now growing pumpkins. Woohoo! Yay! Pumpkin farmer squirrel. And in my totally imaginary example, it's going to cost us $60,000 per year to lease the land. And keep in mind, we pay that money whether we grow anything or not. We just have to pay the landowners. And then I'm going to say it costs $1.50 per pumpkin produced and sold to pay for the seeds, the fertilizer, the water, and the labor to pick it. I have no idea if this is reasonable or not. I've just come up with that amount. It was in my head. And then you can sell pumpkins for $7 each. And obviously this is a very simplified problem because if you've ever been to buy pumpkins either at the store or at a farm, you know that different size pumpkins sell for different prices. So again, we're going to start with a very simplified model just to get the hang of it, but then you can expand the model to represent a lot of more complicated situations. So first off, we've got all of that. I'm going to move this ever so slightly sideways if I can. Pardon me, Farmer Squirrel. And let's see, can I get this in kind of there? This is the business formulas. X is the number of units produced and sold. The revenue is price times the number of units we sell or produce, same thing. Cost is the variable cost plus the fixed cost. And the profit is the revenue minus the cost. Let me put that right there. And let's see if I can get it to all fit into I'm sure we can do it. Yes, we did it. Okay, part A. Using the above information, find an expression for the pumpkin company's revenue, given that X is the number of pumpkins produced and sold in a year. So I'm telling you specifically X is just the number of pumpkins. So no dozens, no hundreds. It is exactly equal to the number. And so I want revenue, which is spelled that way with the UE, again, because it comes from the French. And we're going to call it R right now. Later on, we will call it R of X, but we're not to there yet. And I've got price times X. There are two numbers that are going to look very similar. One is going to be the cost per pumpkin, and one is going to be the selling price. Revenue has to do with price. And when we talk about the price, that is a price per pumpkin, right? They're $7 each. So whenever you see per pumpkin or each, something like that, you're going to have to multiply by X. So that's a little hint that you're going to be doing that. But in this case, the price is $7 times X. So our revenue is 7X. So if we sell 2 pumpkins, it'll be 7 times 2 or $14 in revenue. If we sell 4 pumpkins, it's 7 times 4, which would be $28. Now, obviously, there are a couple of other costs we have to consider before we start counting how much money was going to go in the bank. This is just the money that people pay us. This is before we pay our bills. So revenue, if you've heard the terms gross and net, revenue is a gross. It is just how much money comes in before we've paid our bills. Okay, part B. Let's see if I can get this in. I'm going to scooch this just a little bit. Explain the difference between the fixed and variable costs in the example. Now, when I ask you a question like this, I know this could involve a lot of English. As far as I am concerned, you do not need to use full sentences, but you do need to be clear. And the clearest way to do this is you could just make a list. For example, what are the fixed costs? And what are the variable costs? You see it there? Yes, there we go. Okay, so we've got the fixed costs and the variable costs. And let's just go ahead and look at what sort of costs we have. Right up there, I'm going to move this a little bit over because we're not using it for this. It costs, and let me... Do I have a nice red pen? It costs $60,000 per year to lease the land. So now, is that going to be a per pumpkin cost? And the answer is no. This is just going to be a fixed cost. We're going to have to, in fact, I'm not going to write an equal sign. I think I'm going to write a colon so that I can just make a list. So I'm going to say $60,000 for the land. Okay, so that's a fixed cost. We're not paying $60,000 per pumpkin. We don't rent the land according to how many pumpkins we make, although it's possible you could set up some sort of a contract about that, but that's not the contract we have. We're just spending $60,000 total. So then next up, we've also got this cost in the second line, and this one gives us a hint. The hint is that per pumpkin. That tells us that's a variable cost. So again, I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to change this from an equal sign to a colon because it'll just be more flexible about how I write it. This is going to be $1.50 per pumpkin. And that's going to include, it says it includes the seeds, the fertilizer, the water, and the labor. Does that make sense? So that's all you would need to do. You would just, if I asked you this on a test, for example, and I wanted you to label them, just tell me which is which. You wouldn't have to write long sentences. And while we're here, this is complete for this particular problem. But let's talk about some other things. For example, if I had to buy a tent, if I wanted to buy a tent to sit in the field, you know, to have like the sales tent where my table and my cash register are, the tent and the table and the cash register, those would all be fixed costs because I would just buy them once or twice. I mean, I may need a couple of tables, but I don't have to keep buying a tent for every pumpkin I sell, right? I don't need to keep spending it. I can just, it's one and done or it's two and done, but it's not per pumpkin. Some other costs that I might incur is perhaps I need to, this was the labor up here, the $1.50 per pumpkin was the labor to pick it. Perhaps I need to hire some people to help me sell the pumpkins. Well, now that gets interesting because I would claim selling the pumpkins might be a variable cost because I'm going to hire someone, and if I sell a lot of pumpkins, I'm going to have to hire more people. So I might have a per pumpkin cost, just like the labor to pick. If I have a lot of pumpkins to pick, I have to spend a lot on labor. If I don't have as many pumpkins, I spend less. Or it's possible that maybe I just hire one person for the whole season, and they just help me, and the two of us together, we just sell all the pumpkins. And so I don't need to, my labor costs aren't going to depend on how many pumpkins we sell. It's just the two of us. So it could count as a fixed cost. So these problems can go from very simple to very complex very quickly. That's why I wanted to keep this problem pretty straightforward. Okay, so for this problem, $60,000 is the fixed costs, $1.50 is the variable cost. And if you notice here, I've got my, and here, as long as I underline this one, I should probably underline this one. This 7 comes from right here because we're selling the pumpkins. So that's the price. Where's my, this is the price. Right there. So the price of each pumpkin is 7, so that's part of the revenue. And then these two numbers, the 60,000 and the $1.50, these are both costs, and they go into the fixed and the variable costs. Woohoo! Okay, pardon me, Farmer Squirrel. Why don't you sit over here for right now? You can be supportive from the side. The best way to support somebody is to not get in the way, right? To make sure they know you're there, but that you're not preventing them from doing their math. Okay, so now we're going to have to remember what was on the previous page, which thankfully I do. I've got my formulas here to help me remember. Let me scooch you over just a little bit. I've got some paper in case we need some more paper. There we go. Okay, everybody fits? Brilliant. Using the above information, the previous information, find an expression for the pumpkin company's costs. So I'm calling it cost. Sometimes you'll see total cost. And that's going to be, and I'm going to come down here so I've got a little bit more room, the variable cost plus the fixed cost. And some people like to do these backwards, so you can do the fixed costs first. Doesn't matter which one comes first. I'm going to start with the fixed cost myself. That 60,000 is just straight up 60,000. That just becomes a single cost because it's not per pumpkin. But the variable cost was $1.50, as you recall. So if we look at the previous page, the variable cost $1.50 per pumpkin. And now here's where people sometimes forget things. Since it says per pumpkin, you need to write times X. The variable cost will always have, well, a variable in it. I mean, it stands to reason. So the variable cost will change according to how much X changes. So you need a variable in that. So our total cost, C, is going to be 150X plus 60,000. And that's our equation for cost, or total cost. I think the book may call it TC. I can't recall. So TC or C is the cost. Okay, you guys ready? Dun, dun, dun. I know, this is very exciting. Using parts A and C, find an expression for the pumpkin company's annual profits. Now, sometimes books and math teachers add in extra words. The word annual, what does that refer to? Well, if you come back here, you see that the 60,000 isn't just one, you bought the land, it's per year. And so I put in the annual profits there because one, when you're working with pumpkins, right, you work over many seasons, but it's 1 year. You generally sell the pumpkins when they ripen. So between like August and October, possibly into November for pies, but that's pretty much it. And then you wait and then you plant again in the spring. So it is an annual endeavor. And then also the fixed costs happen every year. So we have to work that way. And I want to find the profits, which is P, which is going to be revenue minus cost. People, race, cars. Porcupines are cute. However you want to remember it. I'm sure you can come up with something that you'll be able to remember. Perhaps revenue minus cost is just fine. So I want my R minus my C. So through the magic of television, you can look back in your notes, but I remember that our revenue is going to be 7x and our cost was 150x plus 60,000. And now, hopefully, as you're looking at the screen, you're saying, oh no, you forgot something, because I did. So what did I forget? Well, the thing is when we subtract C, we need to make sure we subtract the whole thing. But C actually has two parts to it. So since there's a subtraction here, you're going to want to use parentheses. Does that make sense? Make sure you've got the total cost in parentheses. If you want, you could put the revenue in parentheses too. That will not change it. But if you have two terms following a subtraction, make sure you're very careful. In the end, what's going to happen is that minus, or the -1, depending on your perspective, distributes through, and we've got minus 150x minus 60,000. No one's giving us $60,000, right? So this 60,000 comes out of our $7 per pumpkin. And suddenly when you start looking at this, you start to think, oh, this is why the pumpkin place near my house or near my apartment also offers bouncy house rides, because you can make a lot of money off of a bouncy house ride, and you're only going to make, what is that? If we combine these two, I believe that's 5.50x. So we're only going to make $5.50 per pumpkin, and we have to sell enough pumpkins to make up the $60,000 we spent on the land. So there's our profit formula. Yay! And then let's work on the last part. Find the profit received if the company sells 12,000 pumpkins. This just amazes me. So 12,000, that seems like a lot to me. Personally, what does 12,000 represent? And since it's pumpkins, this 12,000 means that x equals 12,000. Whenever you've got an equation, there are usually two things you could do. You can either put the 12,000 on the left side, right? Or you can put it in for the variable. And in this case, we're going to put it in for the variable. The profit received is going to be 5.50 times 12,000. Minus 60,000. Some of you could possibly do this one in your head. It's not that hard, but just because this is getting recorded, I'm going to go ahead and use my calculator. So 5.5 times 12, 1, 2, 3 is 66,000. 66,000 minus 60,000 is going to be a profit of 6,000. Woohoo. Now, I know that there are a couple of questions you can have, like, do you have to write the $sign? When you answer a word problem, you should try to always give units. So in this case, the units is dollars. When it's a formula or an equation, you do not need to use units. In math, we don't usually put units in. However, you notice I have done an interesting choice here. So I will make the point that if you would rather write it as 5.5x minus 60,000, that's fine as well. I was keeping it in 5.50 because we're dealing in dollars, and dollars use 2 decimal places. So it's really a style choice. I don't think either one of these is better or worse. It just depends on which one is easier for you to use. So we did it. And right now we're feeling very sad for Farmer Squirrel, who's worked so hard. Thank you so much, Farmer Squirrel, for growing all these pumpkins. 12,000 pumpkins and only $6,000 to show for it. So that's like in the end, it was like 50 cents per pumpkin. So I think Farmer Squirrel is probably going to look into some bouncy houses and maybe selling maybe a haunted house you can buy tickets to, or some snacks, or a petting zoo, something he can add on so he can make a little bit more money when he's selling his pumpkins. But hopefully this all made sense. If it didn't, please come talk to me. Please ask questions, message me, go to tutors, ask them. We would love to make sure this all makes perfect sense. So you guys are awesome. We're up at 25 minutes, so it's a good time to get out, look at something green, get some fresh air. Know that you're awesome and amazing. And I will see you next time. Math on. Woohoo.